Chapter 13, State Secretariat Organization and Functions. The functioning of the government is made effective with the help of task-oriented ministries. No ministry can run smoothly without the support of a secretariat at the union as well as state levels. The secretariat helps the government in policy making and execution of legislative functions. This unit discusses the organizations and functions of the state secretariat. It explains the patterns of departmentalization in the secretariat and brings out the distinction between the secretariat department and executive department. In addition, position and functions of the chief secretary in the state administration are also discussed. Meaning of secretariat. The three components of government at the state level are: number 1, the minister; number 2, the secretary; number 3, the executive head. The last one in most cases is called the director, although other nomenclatures are also used to refer to the executive head. The minister and the secretary together constitute the secretariat, whereas the office of the executive head is designated as directorate. Literally, the term secretariat means the secretary's office. It originated at a time when we had in India was really a government run by the secretaries. After independence, the power of governance passed into the hands of the popularly elected ministers, and thus the ministry became the seat of authority. In the changed political situation, the term secretariat has become a synonym for the minister's office. But because the secretary is the principal advisor to the minister, he needs to be in the physical vicinity of the minister. In effect, therefore, secretariat refers to the complex of building that houses the office of the minister and secretaries. The expression secretariat, it has been observed, is used to refer to the complex of departments whose heads politically are ministers and administratively are the secretaries. Position and role of state secretariat. The following extract from the Administrative Reform Commission's report on the state administration give a succinct expression to the position and role of the state secretariat. The state secretariat, as the top layer of the state administration, is primarily meant to assist the state government in policy making and in discharging its legislative functions. It also acts as a memory and a clearing house proprietary to certain types of decision and as a general supervisor of executive action. The main functions of the state secretariats are broadly as follows. Number 1. Assisting the ministers in policy making, in modifying policies from time to time and in discharging their legislative responsibilities. Framing draft legislation and rules and regulations. Third, coordinating policies and programs, supervising and controlling their execution and reviewing of the results. Fourth, budgeting and control of expenditure. Fifth, maintaining contact with the Government of India and other state governments. And sixth, overseeing the smooth and efficient running of the administrative machinery and initiating measures to develop greater personal and organizational competence. The administrative philosophy to which the secretariat system owes its existence is that policy making must be kept separate from policy execution. Several advantages are claimed in favor of such an arrangement. Number 1. Freedom from operational involvement makes the policy making apparatus forward looking and allows it to think in terms of overall goals of government rather than narrow sectional interest of individual departments. Second, policy making receives the time and attention it deserves. If different set of persons are charged with the functions of policy making as well as its execution, this is because policy making is a serious exercise in drawing up what would be future course of action. It should not be treated as less urgent than policy execution, which involves routine day-to-day administration. Third, Secretariat serves as a disinterested advisor to the minister. It is important to remember that the secretary is the secretary to the government and not to the minister concerned, which ensures objective examination of the proposals coming from the executive departments. It enables a more balanced scrutiny of proposals. Fourth, policy making must be separated from current administration and day to day implementation should be left to different agency with executive freedom which ensures delegation of authority. It should be in order at this stage to portray the broad dimension of the Secretariat's role in some detail. The foremost of these is the Secretariat's role in policy making. It assists the ministers in the formulation of governmental policies. This has many aspects. First, the Secretary supplies to the minister all the data and information needed for policy formulation. Second, the secretaries sometimes provide the programs with content by working out their details on whose strength ministers are voted to power. Third, the secretariat assists ministers in their legislative work. Drafts of legislation to be introduced in the legislature by the ministers are prepared by the secretaries. Besides, to answer question in the legislature, the minister needs relevant information. The secretary supplies this information to the minister. Secretary also collects information required with respect to the legislative committees. Fourth, the secretariat functions as an institutionalized memory. This means that the emerging problems require an examination in the light of precedents. Records and files maintained in the Secretariat serve as an institutional memory and ensure continuity and consistency in the disposal of cases. Fifth, the Secretariat is a channel of communication between one government and other, and between the government and such agencies as the Planning Commission and Finance Commission. Finally, the Secretariat evaluates and keeps track of execution of policies by the field agencies. Structure of a typical Secretariat department. Virtually, a typical Secretariat department has two hierarchical formations, that of the officers and that is described as the officers. Conveniently, the officers' hierarchy had been three levels. Under this, a typical administrative department is headed by a secretary who will have a complement of deputy secretaries and under assistant secretaries. But with growth in the functions of various secretariat departments, the number of levels in the officers' hierarchy has been on the increase. As a result, between the secretary and the deputy secretary, in some states, position of additional or joint secretaries have also been created. Office. A unique feature of the secretariat system in India has been the distinction between its two component parts. The transitionary cadre of a few superior officers and the permanent office. The officers in each department, because they hold tenure posts, come and go. It is the office which is manned by permanent functionaries, which provides the much needed element of continuity to the secretariat department. Unlike officers, the office constitutes the permanent element in the secretariat system. The office component is comprised of superintendents, assistants, upper and lower division clerks, stenotypists, and typists. Office performs the spade work on the basis of which the officers consider cases and make decisions. Office supplies officers with materials which constitute the basis of decision making. The structure of a typical department comprises department, secretary, wing, additional or joint secretary, division, deputy secretary or director, branch, under secretary, section officer. The section is the lowest organization unit and it is under the charge of a section officer. Other functionaries in a section are assistant, upper and lower division clerks, stenotypists, typists, etc. A section is referred to as the office. Two sections constitute the branch, which is under the charge of an under secretary. Two branches ordinarily form a division, which is headed by a deputy secretary. When the volume of work of a department is more than a secretary can manage, one or more wings are established with a joint secretary in charge of each wing. At the top of the organizational hierarchy is the secretary, who is in charge of the department. Pattern of departmentalization in state secretariat. Each secretary is normally in charge of more than one department. The number of secretariat departments would therefore be larger than the number of secretaries. The number of secretariat departments quite naturally varies from state to state. Their number broadly ranges from 10 and 40 in different states. The number of departments in a particular state is not necessarily related to its size in terms of population. For instance, a small state like Mizoram had as many as 36 secretariat departments in 1987. The corresponding figure for Andhra Pradesh, which is much larger state, was 19 in 1982. Following is a typical example of the pattern of departmentalization at the secretariat level. General Administration Department, Home Department, Revenue Department, Food and Agriculture Department, Finance and Planning Department, Planning Wing, Finance and Planning Department, Finance Wing, Law Department, Irrigation and Power Department, Medical and Health Department, Education Department, Industries Department, Legislature Department, Panchayati Raj Department, Command Area Development Department, Transport, Road and Building Department, Housing and Municipal Administration and Urban Development Department, Labor Employment and Technical Education Department, Social Welfare Department, Rural Development Department, Forest Department, Environment Department, Women and Child Welfare Department. Larger number of departments in particular states would result from restricting the scope of the functions and charges of those which may be partly. Partly such increase in the number of departments may arise from the peculiar problems a particular state may face. There is a lot of criticism about the work allocation existing in secretariat departments, which is first work allocation is lopsided in that some departments are burdened with more work than others. Second, allocation is far from rational even in terms of homogeneity of work. Not only the subjects handled by a particular department too enormous and therefore unmanageable, but these are also too heterogeneous, causing problems of coordination. These are further aggraved when charges of particular departments are incomplete in scope. Distinction between Secretariat Department and Executive Department, discrete process or a continuum. The Secretariat Department must be distinguished from the Executive Department. The Secretariat has the function of aiding, assisting and advising the political executive in arriving at policy choices. The heads of executive departments, who are the main known as director, along other nomenclature are also used to refer to them, have the responsibility of implementing policies formulated by political executive. Therefore, the secretaries assist in policy formulation, whereas the director's role lies in executive policy. Long ago, the Simon Commission had observed that executive department is an administrative unit separate from the secretariat, which reaches its apex usually in a single officer like the Inspector General of Police or the Chief Conservator of Forests outside the Secretariat altogether. Such a head of a department will usually be concerned principally with a single secretary to government and a single minister of his order and the funds which he has to spend. Each Secretariat department is in charge of a number of executive departments. This number varies over a wide range, with some departments taking charge of a much larger number of executive heads than others. There is an average of 6 to 7 executive departments in relation to one Secretariat department. However, it must be carefully noted that not all Secretariat departments have executive departments attached to them. Some of the Secretariat departments are engaged in advisory and controlling functions, and therefore do not have executive departments reporting to them. Examples are departments of law and finance, etc. The Secretariat and executive departments organizationally organizationally express the policy formulation and policy execution process involved in the functioning of the government. The two may be looked upon an extension of the personality of the Council of Ministers. The former is a policy making organ, the latter is a policy executive organ. The Secretariat department is normally headed by a generalist civil servant drawn from the IAS. The executive department by a specialist. The specialist, the head of the executive department, functions under the supervision of the generalist, the secretary or the head of the Secretariat department. This can be illustrated with some examples. Director of Agriculture, who is a specialist in that he is trained in and holds a formal degree in agricultural science, would function under the supervision of the secretary. Agriculture, a generalist and IAS. The latter represents agriculture department at the secretariat level, whereas the director of agriculture represents agriculture department at the executive level. The director is the executive head of the agriculture department, the Directorate of Agriculture. Likewise, the Home Department in the Secretariat has the Director General of the Police as its executive head of this department. Similar correlation obtains between Education Secretary and Education Director, Industries Secretary and Industries Director, Social Welfare Secretary and Social Welfare Director, and so on. We have emphasized the distinctness of the role of the Secretariat and the Directorate by saying that while the former is concerned with policy formulation, the latter is concerned with policy execution or with administering policy, or to put it yet more simply, the administration. The question which may therefore be asked is whether policy and administration are discrete processes. The answer is that at a conceptual level, the two are distinct. It is possible to identify and define them as two clearly distinguishable phenomena. But at a practical plane, the two are inextricably interlinked, even tend to become indistinguishable, and therefore it is difficult to say where the policy ends and administration begins. Policy is concerned with political choices and involves questions of broader values, whereas administration is concerned with the implementing programs emanating from particular policy decisions. Administration therefore involves such details of execution as framing organizational structures, staffing of organizations, coordinating activities, directing, controlling, and motivating the personnel, and so on. That the two dichotomous is the traditional view, which owes its origin to Woodrow Wilson's essay of 1887, The Study of Administration. Politics, he said, is the proper activity of legislature and other policy making groups. Example goes political parties, cabinet, etc. Administration is the sphere of administrators who carry out the policies stated in the laws. The context of the dichotomy was the civil service reform movement of the 1880s in the United States, which aimed to eliminate political interference in civil service. It was argued that civil service recruitment should, in the interest of administrative efficiency, be based on considerations of merit and fitness rather than partisan politics. In other words, politics should be kept out of administration. Max Weber further justified separation of policy from administration by arguing that the attributes of politicians are exactly the opposite of those of the civil servants. The essence of politics is to take a stand, to take personal responsibility for the policies decided on, and to admit the transitionary nature of the political role. The essence of administration is to execute conscientiously the order of the political authority. Even if it appears wrong to the administrator is politically neutral. He simply does what he is asked to do and assumes no personal responsibility. However, the complexities of governmental operations have increasingly required administrators to become involved in policy making or political decisions. As a result of this, it is in practice found to be difficult to draw a clear boundary separating policy and administration, or to say where policy ends and administration begins. This would be clear from the following. Sources of administrative expertise. There are several sources from which the modern day administrators have obtained a kind of expertise which the politicians needs to use when formulating policies. As number 1, the administrators say stay in office longer. They are scarier civil servants than the politicians who come and go with elections. The former have opportunities of giving sustained attention to problems. From this, they gain an invaluable kind of practical knowledge that comes from the experience of handling these very problems day in and day out. This knowledge is conserved in records and transmitted to new generations of civil servants through training programs. This monopoly of experience and practical knowledge, coupled with continuity in office, gives them a decisive edge over the politicians in framing policies. Second, the administrators are in possession of facts, figures, information, and intelligence regarding the specific area in which policies are to be framed. Politicians would need these data and statistics in formulating policies. Third, administrative expertise also comes preeminently from the fact that the government of today employ a large variety of professionals, doctors, engineers, scientists, economists, etc. They possess technical knowledge which forms a vital input in policy making. Fourth, the advent of merit system has also helped to build up administrative expertise by attracting better talent in civil services and loosening the grip of politicians on civil service. Administrators' role in policy making. The increase in civil service expertise, together with growth in the functions of government and growing complexity of administration, has resulted in an increasing dependence of politicians on administrators in the task of policy making. This is reflected in the following. Number 1. Policy making exercise is done on the basis of facts, figures, information, and data which are supplied by the bureaucracy. In other words, politicians, in order to enhance the credibility of the policies they frame, depend on the administrators' data support to their policies. Civil servants, based on their long administrative experience, tender advice to the lay politicians on the administrative, technical, and financial feasibility of the various policy options under consideration. Third, civil servants prepare the draft legislations which after ministerial approval are placed before the legislature for its consideration. In other sources of administrative expertise, there are several sources from which the modern day administrators have obtained a kind of expertise which the politicians need to use when formulating policies. Third is civil servants prepare the draft legislations which after ministerial approval are placed before the legislature for its consideration. In other words, administrators initiate the process of public policy formulation, which in its final form assumes the shape of an act passed by the legislature. Fourth, the legislators formulate policy through the exercise of administrative discretion. When an administrator is required to choose between alternative courses of action within a policy frame, he is said to exercise discretion. In this sense, administrators are described as supplementary lawmakers, because here the actual content of policy becomes entirely a matter for bureaucratic determination. Here, administrators actually decide how the powers of the state shall be used in specific cases. In modern times, there has come about a tremendous increase in administrative discretion by virtue of an by virtue of an incessant increase in the volume of legislation to be enacted. Legislature is under the circumstances compelled to confine itself to indicating broad framework of law, leaving details to be filled up by the administrative agencies. The growing variety and complexity of laws to be enacted has further circumscribed the legislature's competence. The legislators do not have the technical know-how and training to venture into the details of particular legislations. This further necessitates exercise of administrative discretion. And at any rate, if the legislature delves into the details of each law, this would be at the cost of other important duties and functions of the legislators, and therefore an undesirable thing to happen. This coupled with the assurance that it has the necessary means available to hold administration accountable to itself has in fact encouraged the legislature in its attitude of not delving too deeply into the details of the enactment it formulates. And it is not possible to work out the details of the enactment for another reason too. Ultimately, the policy is to be executed in the field where an administrator must necessarily face a bewildering variety of situations as he sets himself to the task of policy execution. For the law-making agency, it is clearly not possible to visualize at the point of legislation the different variety of situations that may arise in the field. For this reason, once again, the policy makers must do one more than provide one broad guidelines in the legislation they frame. Chief Secretary. Position of Chief Secretary. Every state has a Chief Secretary. This functionary is the kingpin of the state secretariat, his control extending to all secretariat departments. He is not simply first among equals, he is in fact the chief of the secretaries. The chief secretary's preeminent position is clearly reflected in the varied roles he or she assumes in the state administrative setup. The chief secretary is the chief advisor to the chief minister and secretary to the state cabinet. He is the head of the general administration department, whose political head is the chief minister himself. Chief Secretary is also the head of the civil services in the state. He is the main channel of communication between the state government and the central and other state governments. Chief Secretary is the chief spokesman and public relations officer of the state government and is looked upon to provide leadership to the state's administrative system. The office of the Chief Secretary is an institution unique to the states. It is without a parallel in the administrative landscape of the entire country. The Chief Secretary's office has, for instance, no parallel in the central government. The work he performs in relation to the state government is at the union level, shared by three high-ranking functionaries of more or less an equal status, that is, Cabinet Secretary, Home Secretary and Finance Secretary. This is a vivid reflection on the wide scope of the duties and powers of the Chief Secretary. Yet another significant reflection on the position of the Chief Secretary's office is the fact that it has been excluded from the operation of the tenure system. Chief Secretary would normally retire as the Chief Secretary, or else he would from this position move to the union government to take up a more important position. In considering the position of Chief Secretary, another fact needs to be taken note of. The incumbent of this office is not necessarily the senior most civil servant of the state. This was at any rate the situation till 1973, when, for instance, in UP the Chief Secretary was junior in rank and seniority to the members of the Board of Revenue. Same was the case in Punjab, where he was junior to the financial commissioner. Since 1973, however, the office of Chief Secretary has been standardized. Its incumbent since then has begun to hold the rank of the Secretary to the Government of India and receives emoluments admissible to the latter. How does the clamping of the President's rule on a state affect the Chief Secretary's office, where the centre does not appoint advisors During the President's rule, the Chief Secretary becomes clothed with the powers belonging to the Chief Minister. When, however, central advisors are appointed, it tends to inhibit the Chief Secretary in his administrative capacity because the former are drawn from the ranks of senior civil servants, senior to the state's Chief Secretary, as a result of which a hierarchical relationship becomes operative. Chief Secretary's functions. The principal functions of the Chief Secretary are listed below. He is the principal advisor to the Chief Minister, in which capacity he inter alia works out the detailed administrative implications of the proposals made by ministers and coordinates them into a cohesive plan of action. The Chief Secretary is the Secretary to the Cabinet. He prepares the agenda for Cabinet meetings, arranges them, maintains records of these meetings, ensures follow-up actions on Cabinet decisions, and provides assistance to Cabinet committees. The Chief Secretary is the head of the civil services of the state. In that capacity, he decides on the posting and transfers of civil servants. By virtue of the unique position he holds as the head of the official machinery and advisor to the Council of Ministers, the Chief Secretary is the Coordinator-in-Chief of the Secretariat departments. He takes steps to secure interdepartmental cooperation and coordination. For this purpose, he convenes and attends a large number of meetings at the Secretariat and other levels. Meetings serve as a powerful tool of effective coordination and securing cooperation of different agencies. As the Chief of the Secretaries, the Chief Secretary also presides over a large number of committees and holds membership of many others. Besides, he looks after all matters and not falling within the jurisdiction of other secretaries. In this sense, the Chief Secretary is residual legatee. The Chief Secretary is the Secretary by rotation of the Zonal Council of which the particular state is a member. He exercises administrative control over the secretarial buildings, including matters connected with space allocation. He also controls the Central Record Branch, the Secretariat Library, and the Conservancy and Watch and Ward staff. The Chief Secretary also controls the staff attached to the ministers. In situations of crisis, Chief Secretary acts as the nerve center of the state, providing lead and guidance to the concerned agencies in order to expedite relief operations. It would be no exaggeration to say that in times of drought, flood, communal disturbances, etc., he virtually represents the government for all the functionaries and agencies concerned to provide relief. In conclusion, it may be noted that a host of personal matters and many other minutes and unimportant administrative details consumes a sizable chunk of the Chief Secretary's time. The Administrative Reforms Commission is constrained to agree with the following observations of the Maharashtra Reorganization Commission 1962-68 on the manner in which the Chief Secretary has become burdened with trivial details. It seems unfortunate that the highest official in the state has to sign gazette notifications of appointments, promotions, transfers, leaves, etc., that he has to spend time on minute of protocol, passport, etc. To rectify this situation, the ARC has recommended that this functionary be relieved of the work of routine nature as well as be provided with appropriate staff assistance. That alone will ensure speedy implementation of decisions and effective coordination of policies and programs of the state government. Summary. The term Secretariat reflects to the complex of departments which at political level are headed by ministers and at an administrative level by secretaries. Secretaries assist ministers in the task of policy formulation and in their legislative duties, organizationally and functionally. The heads of the executive departments constitute separate and distinct administrative units which are hierarchically subordinate to the secretariat departments In most cases, executive departments are designated as directorates because their heads are in most cases known as directors. Directorate execute policy. Each secretariat department is usually in charge of a number of directorates. Policy and administration, though conceptually distinct categories, are at a practical plane inextricably interlinked. They form a continuum. It is difficult to say where the policy ends and administration begins. This is because the administrators work as supplementary policy makers and have, besides, a large policy making role to perform. The Chief Secretary, as the head of the administrative setup of the state, performs important leadership and coordination functions. This functionary is the nerve center of the state secretariat. This unit has thrown light on all these aspects of the state administration.